So, I I had an intro. I had one. Welcome back to Rolling Review, where we talk about all things nerdy and awesome. I'm Jim, and for the first time in probably a while, I'm reviewing a movie I didn't expect to be trash when I first watched it. So, as you can tell from the title, Coming to America 2 is what this review is about. Just to be upfront, I actually love Eddie Murphy. I loved Coming to America. I like Arsenio Hall. Really, a lot of the people in this movie. You got a bunch of big names: Wesley Snipes, James Earl Jones. There were more people. There people were bit parts like Louis Anderson, Morgan Freeman, Trevor Noah. I should have realized who he was, but I kind of didn't even realize he was in that movie. This movie, but it's fine. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of a lot of these people. I'm a fan of the original, so I went into it with high expectations because the first one was great. And I say that because at the end of the day, I am disappointed in the movie. And that may be because I came in with such high expectations. But let me explain to you why I'm disappointed by this movie. Start this movie with all the characters we know from the previous one, minus Prince Akeem's mother, back in the country of Zamunda, and James Earl Jones's King Jabba Jaffe, I think that's his name, is basically on his deathbed. Prince Akeem is going to become king. He has 3 daughters, and basically it immediately turns into the neighboring general who's in charge of the country. It makes fun of him for only having daughters and no sons, which I get that's kind of a thing in monarchies and shit, but this is supposed to happen like modern day, and it's like you know there have been a lot of historical queens, right? Like whatever, even I don't like all over the world. In Africa, there are historical queens. In Europe, in Asia, there are historical queens. So I don't know. It's kind of dumb. The characters are back. They're all right. The movie though tries to do too much. The basic story is Prince Akeem has to go back to America, find his son, who he apparently had with Leslie Jones, who she wasn't in the original, but whatever. So supposedly he has a son in America no one knew about. It'd be his firstborn to take over the throne, even though his oldest daughter's been doing all the work to take over the throne one day, and she's just kind of being kicked to the curb. And we have craziness ensue, but not really. They put so many side plots and subplots that there's too much in this movie, and for that reason you get funny parts from most of the main characters. However, there are plenty of characters who like you could do the movie without. In fact, he has 3 daughters. The middle and the youngest daughter, not important. Half of his son's family, outside of Tracy Morgan and Leslie Jones, not important. But they're there. They're a thing. There's just too much. See, I was actually looking back at some great comedies and thinking like, how did they do the plot? For instance, Coming to America. The plot is about Prince Akeem going to America to find his wife because he didn't want a prearranged marriage. He wants to meet someone, fall in love, and find a wife. That's it. All the craziness ensues around that plot. And yes, there's subplots and side little things, but all of it is aimed towards that main plot. And so the craziness just comes from all of those things as he is trying to find his wife. In this movie, though, there's not a main plot. Well, I guess it's to prove that his son is the prince by making him do the princely tests, but that's not the main thing. That's like part of it. There's also a subplot where his kid falls in love with someone who is not the princess of the neighboring country. There is the tension between the general of the neighboring country and Prince Akeem, who the general's sister is the one he was supposed to get married to in the first movie, who he told to bark like a dog, who is apparently still barking like a dog because those women are totally subservient, which is kind of also weird. You have this subplot of the prince and his sister, who really should be the leader. You have the families butting heads. You have conflict between Prince Akeem and his wife. You have, I think I'm missing some here because there's frankly just a lot of these subplots. And at the end of the day, they put so many different people in this movie, and each one needed funny moments, and that's why they have these subplots, but they're not necessary, and it overall is just like a mediocre movie and kind of disappointing. In comparison to Coming to America, the sequel just isn't as funny, it's just not as good, and the plot's kind of a mess, which you wouldn't think, like, well, it's a comedy, like, plot's not super important, but it kind of is. Like I said before, I was looking at other comedies that I really love, like Mrs. Doubtfire. It's about Robin Williams' character trying to spend time with his kids. He's in a divorce. The fact that a studio exec is trying to pick up the Mrs. Doubtfire character for a show is a side plot, but still angles back to that main plot because the family is there in the same restaurant. You have things like Blazing Saddles, where the main plot is that the governor is trying to tank this town to build a railroad through it. So he made the sheriff a black man. Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. The plot is they're trying to go to White Castle. The craziness ensues on their way to White Castle and their attempt to get there. All of those great comedies. I mean, Harold and Kumar, probably not the best comedy, but it's still a pretty funny movie. They all have an individual, like they have one goal. And it's fairly obvious throughout the entire movie. This is the one goal of the movie. This is the plot, and everything else that happens around it aids that plot, and the craziness that ensues, the funny parts, all the comedy that ensues is helped by the plot, because we all know what the plot is. We're all following along. It's not all over the place, but this sequel movie is not. Like, there's too much going on. They could have dropped the stuff with the neighboring country and just solely talked about Finding the Heir, which, if you really wanted another sequel to milk that shit, you could do the next one about him finding his wife. But like the first one could be basically bringing in the son into this father-daughter relationship where the daughter thinks she should be in charge of the country next, and he's trying to prove himself to be the prince. And so it could be between like those three. I mean, really, I think that should be the main and the only plot, but unfortunately they added way too much other stuff around that, because the oldest daughter really doesn't have too many moments to shine, except at the very end. You don't see her really being a main integral part throughout. She sprinkled in, and so they kind of dropped the ball there, because they have this thing of like the test for the prince. It would have made sense that she was also doing the test to prove, but no, she doesn't. And so she just kind of helps him with like parts of the test, even though she thinks she should be queen. But that's kind of like not a big point. They talk about it more than they show it, and you should always show and not tell. It's not a good sequel, and they're pretty meta about it. The son is talking to the girl he falls in love with about movies, and they make the comment that everything right now is reboots or sequels, and like it sucks. And then they're like, but some sequels are worth telling. And I was sitting there, I'm like, not this one. It made me laugh. I don't care if anyone else laughed. I thought it was funny. Yeah, I mean, if you don't know what to watch and you're just trying to fill some dead air, yeah, Coming to America, the sequel, not terrible. No reason, if you don't have Amazon Prime, it's not the reason to get Amazon Prime to see this on Amazon Prime Video, which is how it was released. Out of 10, I'd give it a 7. Yeah, it could be a lot better. It could be a whole lot better. They have this thing where just like now, end of the video. They feel like I'm squeezing in more points, just like they just felt like they need to squeeze in a bunch of cameos and characters from the first one, like Randy Watson was the sexual chocolate guy with the Jerry curls and all that. Yeah, no, throw him in there at the end because that was needed for a King Jaffe Joffer. The names are kind of all over the. They all sound the same of the previous kings before like Akeem. But I mean, like they just squeezed in Morgan Freeman, Sultan Peppa, John Legend, Gladys Knight. I'm sorry, now I'm trying to like look at these because it's kind of ridiculous. Like they just squeezed in a bunch of random ass cameos because I guess they could. They definitely weren't needed. And then they just tried shoving in there like these characters that honestly I could have done without. Reverend Brown, yeah, he's in the first movie and he's entertaining in the first movie, not in the sequel. Randy Watson probably could have not been in this movie. That's one of Eddie Murphy's characters. It's a mess. You don't have to go see this. Honestly, like it's okay. 7 out of 10. Hey, C's get degrees, but C shouldn't get sequels after this. And God willing, this is the last one they do of this. Can we please stop with the sequels? Seriously, it's getting. All right, well, I'm probably gonna go watch the original because it was so much funnier, and that's how I'm gonna spend my night. So hopefully you spend your night watching a better movie than this. They're out there. There are many of them. Have fun. Bye. That was not a reason why I'm disappointed in this movie, but it kind of is the essence of how I feel.